President Trump says the United States needs Greenland for international security.
The Panama Canal, he said he would tariff Denmark at a very high level if it does not give Greenland to the United States.
In 2025, the Pentagon confessed a humiliating truth. America's hypersonic missile system was stalled, not by Russia, not by China, but by Canada. Ottawa now controls the rare earth metals Washington desperately needs to build its weapons. While the U.S. threatened and shouted, Canada quietly signed billion-dollar deals with Greenland. And just like that, the world's superpower lost the Arctic, without a single shot being fired. Beneath Greenland's thick ice lies one of the greatest treasures on Earth, a jackpot valued at more than $4 trillion. Hidden in the frozen ground are rare earth metals, gold, oil, and natural gas. Resources so critical that they decide wars and shape economies. These minerals, including molybdenum, niobium, graphite, and rare earths, power the smartphones in our hands, the electric cars on our roads, and the satellites that circle our skies. They're also the backbone of modern weapons, from fighter jets to hypersonic missiles. And the demand is exploding. The International Energy Agency has warned that global demand for rare earths could double by 2030 as nations race to control the future of energy and defense. That makes the Arctic not just another frontier, but the most strategic battlefield of the 21st century. Whoever owns Greenland's minerals controls the future of technology. Whoever controls the energy buried under the ice decides which countries thrive and which collapse. This is why America, Canada, Europe, and China all watch Greenland closely. It is no longer about icebergs and glaciers, it's about power, wealth, and survival in the new age of competition. In 2019, Donald Trump stunned the world when he openly said he wanted to buy Greenland. He called it the deal of the century, as if the island were just another real estate flip. Denmark's prime minister quickly rejected the idea, calling it absurd, and Trump reacted with anger by canceling a planned state visit. For him, Greenland wasn't a sovereign land with 56,000 people, it was a property listing. By 2024, Trump revived the dream, this time with sharper threats. He warned Denmark of heavy tariffs if it refused to hand over Greenland. Instead of building trust, Washington showed arrogance, turning allies into critics. While Trump shouted about ownership, he never asked Greenlanders what they wanted. His gamble was simple: bully, threaten, and eventually force the deal. But the more he pushed, the more Denmark and Greenland resisted. What could have been a diplomatic conversation became an international embarrassment. America was no longer seen as a partner. It was seen as a would-be colonizer, and in the process, Trump exposed how U.S. power could be undermined by its own pride. While Washington shouted about buying Greenland, Canada moved quietly with a plan that looked more like chess than poker. At the center was Mark Carney, the former Bank of England governor and a Canadian economist with global respect. Instead of threats, he used contracts, diplomacy, and trust to build influence in the Arctic. In 2025, Carney announced that Canada would expand its Arctic presence and invest in developing critical minerals as part of its NATO commitments. Canadian spending included hundreds of millions of dollars to strengthen Arctic operations and secure access to resources vital for defense and technology. This strategy was patient, professional, and silent compared to Trump's noisy threats. Carney showed Greenland and its allies that Ottawa saw them as partners, not property. This respectful approach unlocked doors that Washington could never open. While America was still demanding loyalty, Canada was building partnerships. And by the time the world noticed, Greenland's most valuable resources were already tied to Ottawa's agreements. Canada had turned soft power into hard control without ever raising its voice. When Canada came to Greenland, it did not talk about ownership. It talked about respect. Greenland's parliament made clear that its people did not want to be treated like a colony. They condemned proposals of takeover as disrespectful and asserted their democratic institutions must be honored. They wanted partners who would invest in jobs, training, and long-term independence. Greenland's parliament emphasized that its future must be decided by its people, not external rulers. Canada's offers included local hiring rules, revenue sharing, and infrastructure projects that gave Greenlanders a voice in their future. This was the exact opposite of America's approach, which tried to bully and threaten its way to control. For the first time, Greenland's leaders saw a chance to use their resources for their own development rather than simply feeding the power of others. They began to demand more from foreign investors, better wages, stronger environmental protections, and funds to support local economies. Respect became the price of entry, and Canada was willing to pay it. This shift gave Greenland confidence to say no to American pressure. A small nation of 56,000 people had found its strength by choosing dignity over dependency. In that choice, Greenland redrew the map of power in the Arctic. The breaking point came when Donald Trump stood before Congress and declared that America should take control of Greenland for its own good. Denmark quickly hit back, warning that any attempt to pressure or coerce Greenland would be treated as an attack on NATO itself. This was a shocking moment because for the first time, the alliance faced a threat not from Moscow or Beijing, but from Washington. European nations like France and Norway rushed to show support for Denmark and Greenland, even deploying naval and intelligence assets to the Arctic. Poland, usually one of America's closest allies, hesitated and refused to take sides. The unity that had defined NATO for 75 years began to crack. Instead of circling around Washington, member states were closing ranks against it. Trump had managed to do what Russia and China had tried for decades: split NATO from the inside. By early 2025, Canada and its Nordic partners built a $3 billion Arctic alliance that completely changed the balance of power. The contracts locked Greenland's minerals into European and Canadian hands, leaving Washington out in the cold. Suddenly, U.S. defense companies faced shortages of the metals needed for satellites, fighter jets, and hypersonic missiles. Lockheed Martin slowed its hypersonic program, and Raytheon began reaching out to Canadian suppliers, desperate for access. Even NASA admitted that delays in rare earth supply chains were affecting future satellite launches. The bitter irony was that American venture capital had helped finance the very projects that excluded the United States. America's military strength on paper meant little when it couldn't secure the materials to build its weapons. What Trump had promised as the deal of the century ended as one of the most humiliating defeats in modern U.S. history. The shock of America's failure in Greenland spread quickly across the world. In European capitals, leaders quietly admitted they were relieved to see Washington humble. Years of U.S. pressure and bullying had left allies frustrated, and Canada's success gave them an alternative partner. NATO, once defined by American leadership, was now showing signs of independence. France increased its naval presence in Arctic waters, while Norway boosted intelligence operations to support Denmark and Greenland. Even Poland, one of America's closest allies, refused to openly back Washington's demands. Moscow celebrated the split, calling it proof that U.S. power was fading, while Chinese analysts rushed out reports praising the rise of a new Arctic order. Denmark itself led a major Arctic military exercise without the United States for the first time, joined by France, Germany, Sweden, and Norway. America's humiliation had turned into a global turning point, leaving Washington more isolated than at any time in recent history. With America locked out, Canada stepped forward as the new gatekeeper of the Arctic. Every major contract for mining, shipping, and energy now passed through Ottawa's agreements, giving Canada influence far beyond its size. Greenland's rare earths and molybdenum, vital for Europe's defense and technology, flowed through Canadian-backed projects that secured both profits and partnerships. Unlike Washington's threats, Canada offered steady investment and respect, which earned trust from Greenland and its Nordic allies. The $3 billion Arctic alliance showed the world that power could be won with contracts instead of missiles. France, Norway, and Denmark worked alongside Canada, making Ottawa the hub of Northern strategy. Even Asian markets began negotiating directly with Canadian suppliers. In just months, a country long dismissed as America's quiet neighbor became the power broker of the North. Without firing a shot, Canada had turned diplomacy and resources into real control over the Arctic's future. America lost the Arctic, not to war, but its own arrogance, and Canada claimed victory without firing a shot. Subscribe now to uncover more untold stories of global power shifts the world isn't ready for.